putting data to work for everyone. Traditional BI gets the job done for executives making decisions, but Domo goes beyond that to provide data experiences that enable quick action on those insights for anyone on the front lines.
Modern data experiences to me means that you're using data to make decisions, that you are using data in a way that drives efficacy, that drives value.
Thank you, and welcome to Track 1, Environmental, Social, and Governance. Hopefully you're in the right place, and if so, you're here to hear lessons from the champions, what Ali, Brady, Gretzky, and Williams can teach us about building high-impact data teams. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing our speakers today. So we have Mohammed Aaser, who is with Domo. And Mohammed is Domo's Chief Data Officer, where he helps customers create innovative data apps and modern data experiences that accelerate key business processes and optimize strategic outcomes. He also works closely with the company's data and technology partners to extend the power of Domo's robust ecosystem of integrations. Prior to Domo, Mohammed was CDO at McKinsey and Company, where he championed the strategic use of data across thousands of client initiatives in all industries. He led the firm's data innovation capabilities, accelerating development of data apps by combining deep industry knowledge with cutting-edge data assets, data management technology, and data engineering. He also helped launch and build McKinsey's analytics practice, focused on helping companies scale their data and AI initiatives, and served as the practice's head of operations and strategy. Prior to McKinsey, Mohammed held leadership roles at Ameriprise Financial, where he led the organization's marketing strategy and analytics transformation. Mohammed received his bachelor's degree from the University of Minnesota and an MBA from Harvard University. And our second presenter is Robert McKinney. Robert is an experienced and innovative product leader at Harvard Business Publishing's Corporate Learning Unit. In this role, he is responsible for a range of cross-portfolio initiatives, including the creation of enhanced data and analytics capabilities that support both internal project teams and clients, leveraging offerings from Harvard HBP's broad portfolio of leadership development learning experiences. These capabilities enhance the client experience by allowing internal teams to deliver more consultative services, teams to deliver more consultative services and data while providing clients with self-service, anytime access to explore the activity data from their learning solutions. Further, these capabilities have unlocked data-driven insights to teams responsible for developing and managing the learning offerings. So please give a warm round of applause to our two presenters, Mohammed and Robert.
Thank you, Mark. Now imagine you're 22 years old. You're getting ready for the biggest fight of your life. The odds are stacked against you, 7-1. That was the exact situation Muhammad Ali was in when he took on Sonny Liston. That night he became the champion, but it took him a lifetime to become the greatest of all time. And he joins the ranks of many other champions. And what's really interesting about this group of folks is that they broke the mold. In many cases, they weren't bigger or stronger. In some cases, they were even disadvantaged. And you look at some of these champions. Look at Maradona, for example, one of the best soccer players of all time. He was actually significantly smaller and shorter than the average soccer player. When you looked at Ali, you also recognize that he was leaner. He didn't throw as big punches. So how did these different folks compete? And when you even take a deeper look at some of these folks, I mean, one of my favorite examples is Tom Brady. This was Tom Brady when he was in the draft. He was the bottom pick. People said he looked emaciated. People weren't confident in his ability to actually deliver. And we now know, with 20 years of experience, that he's joined the ranks of the greatest of all time as well. Now, it can be debated, but I'm here in Boston, or in Cambridge, so I consider Brady to be one of the greatest of all time. But when you actually look at the characteristics of some of these folks, you realize that there's actually a lot of similarities. When you look at Tom Brady, even though he was the bottom pick in the draft, or one of the bottom picks in the draft, at that same time, one of the things he highlighted about his capabilities was that the fact that he said, I think my best asset as a player is that in the fourth quarter, with a game on the line, I have the desire to win and the feeling that our team is not going to lose. So, to a certain extent, going beyond his physical capabilities. In many cases, they had this urge to want to prove to the world that they were great. Ali used to have this saying that said, why do we go to the moon? It's because we can, and someone wants to be able to go there. And so he basically linked that to the fact that he wants to win 3 boxing championships. When you looked at Michael Jordan in his Hall of Fame induction, he basically went through all of the people that he wanted to prove wrong, all the people that really discounted his capabilities, and he wanted to show them that he was the best. You also see that they have this strong desire to succeed in the moments. So Jordan, for example, in the last couple seconds or few minutes of the game, he wanted the ball. He wanted to make the shot. Ali wanted to close the show. Jerry Rice wanted to make the catch. And Brady wanted to deliver. And then finally, they had this really strong interest to perform for their customers, for their crowd. Gretzky knew that folks were watching him, and they were excited about seeing how he's going to play better than the night before. Ali, when he fought, and this is an amazing statistic, there were about 4 billion people in the world at the time. 1 billion people watched the Rumble in the Jungle. 25% of the world's population, they were really inspired to deliver a performance for those that were watching them. So that's the first piece. The second is this obsessive practice, this disciplined practice. We see that with many athletes. Serena Williams, for example, spending hours and hours and hours of her childhood every single day of the week practicing. Jerry Rice, I believe it was Joe Montana who mentioned this about Jerry Rice. He said, to say that Jerry Rice was a hard worker was an understatement. It was to the point when Jerry Rice would see someone else in the gym longer than him, he would say, I gotta up my game and I gotta stay longer too. And it wasn't to necessarily one up the person, but he wanted to tell himself that he was putting everything he got into the game. To the point that he didn't really take vacations. He took 2 weeks off. Most people took the season off. He didn't. And he was optimizing everything from looking at all the food he ate to his diet, weighing himself, different activities. And again, this is also said about Tom Brady, that he just put in so much time. His coach, Coach Belichick, basically said no one put in time like Tom did. And what was really interesting about putting in all this extra time was that in most games, the game isn't necessarily won in the first quarter or the first half. It's often won at the end. These folks, because they practiced so hard, they had built this endurance. They were able to deliver when everyone else was tired. And the reflection that I have on this is the fact that how many of us have built that endurance really to deliver in those moments that matter, and then raise our hands in the most challenging moments like some of these champions did. What's also unique about these folks is that they had this childlike curiosity where they tried new things and they weren't stuck in their old ways. And there's a lot of great examples of this where when Ali, for example, took on George Foreman, and I just want to paint a picture of this situation. George Foreman was the biggest puncher. Again, Ali had been the world heavyweight champion at one point. At this point, he was trying to regain that title again from Foreman. Foreman basically knocked everybody out in the first couple of rounds. Ali tried a new strategy, and that was, Foreman's never gone beyond like 3-4 rounds. I'm gonna try to take him into 6, 7, 8 rounds. It turned out that he tried this new move, the rope-a-dope. And Foreman lost all of his energy, and within after he got past the 4th or 5th round, which Foreman had never gotten into, he got exhausted. And that's how Ali won. Gretzky had this amazing style where he would go behind the net and he'd flick goals in. The goalie wouldn't even know how to protect against that type of play. Jordan had his famous fadeaway shot that he mastered in the second half of his career. And so it was amazing to see. And then finally, Serena Williams with her open stance, bringing tremendous power in her strokes that no one had ever seen before. So they tried these new moves, and they tried it often on the fly. They also had a very deep understanding of competitors. Gretzky was known to watch every single match of almost every single game and know every single player, to the extent that he used to make a mental map. I mean, this is before we had all the great data tools. He used to make a map of where the puck was going and how every player used to play, and he built that in his mind, and he used to also write it down. Ali also would give names to his competitors. He called Foreman, who was really big, really strong, big puncher, he called him the Mummy, and he knew exactly how he was going to take him out with speed. And again, he adjusted his style. And I think very importantly, they brought the best out in others. If you look at folks like Maradona, he was just an amazing player. Even his teammates felt like he was a master, and in many cases they felt he could have made his team members feel insecure around him, but he didn't. He actually raised all the levels up. He showed a tremendous amount of care for them and built trust with them. As we know, Jordan was a more challenging teammate, but what he did is he demanded the best, and he brought out the best in his team. And finally, Ali, while he played an individual sport, he actually raised the level of consciousness outside of the ring. So when you take this, you start to realize that these folks weren't the biggest punchers, they weren't the strongest. In many cases, they had to overcome a number of challenging situations. And they didn't do only one thing well. They weren't the fastest. But what was interesting about them is that they were agile and they were multidimensional. They did 5 things really well. The first is they had this mindset to perform and win. The second is this obsessive practice that gave them that last-minute bit of energy. They had this curiosity to create new ways to play that redefined their sport. They had a deep understanding of their competitors and how they would respond, and they would also improve those around them and enable them to operate at their highest potential. So now I've shared a bunch about sports. I want to link this back to data. And so one of the questions that I think many of us probably ask after seeing something like this, or I'd love to ask you, is what does winning mean in the sport of data? If data were a sport, what would be winning? And I could envision a number of types of responses. Something around building a great architecture, having the best talent, great data security, having an AI center. We've talked about that, mastering your data. And I like to think these are all important, but I don't really think that this is what winning with data is. I think winning with data is transforming the performance of your organization. And so, as mentioned before, I'm sharing a few observations just from the last decade being in the data space. At McKinsey, at Ameriprise, now at Domo. And so I want to share with you a couple of nuggets on how I think the types of data challenges are changing, and then what impact it has on us, and then some tactics on what we could do differently. So the first is that the business context around us is rapidly changing. We're seeing a lot more problems and new problems than we've seen before. The second is that we have a number of specialized tools and capabilities. And the third is that often data is for data people. It's interesting, if we were to actually look at how many folks attended this conference, I think we've got a lot of vendors, okay? And then we probably have a lot of data people. But where are the non-data people? How are they engaging with data? I love this quote from Mike Tyson, that everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. And boy, have we gotten punched over the last couple of years. We're seeing more and more unknown problems arising. And often our teams aren't close to those problems. So for example, stockouts of products. Not even being able to keep track of our talent, seeing talent in the Great Resignation, losing people. We're seeing political issues, right? Our capital being stormed. We're seeing inflation. We're seeing gas prices go up. We're seeing war. The reality is even if you had a predictive model, you wouldn't be able to predict some of these things. And even if you could, the question is, how do you respond to these? And then even more than that, how well do we understand the different kind of responses to this? How resilient can we be as these problems come up? And so, I love this 2x2, and just a month ago, we had our business school reunion, and one of the professors, Dutch Leonard, shared this great observation that really you have to think about problems in two different ways. You think about the known problems and unknown problems, and known solutions and unknown solutions. Now, this is a framework that I think was shared some time ago, but I want to link this now to data. Where we have known problems and we have known solutions, we can set up a production line process. We can set up great data pipelines. We can set up specialized tasks. We know how production systems work. We can have standard operating procedures, and we can ensure consistency, quality, efficiency. We can do all that. But more and more, we're facing these unknown problems with unknown solutions. How do you respond to supply chain issues you haven't seen before? How do you respond to people leaving? How do you respond to different situations that are coming up, or different questions that are coming up? And you start to realize that the talent is actually quite different. You need folks who are hypothesis-driven. You need interdisciplinary skills. You don't need a specialist that does one thing. You actually need people who can go across and do many things well, kind of like some of the athletes that we discussed. You need flexibility, you need agility, and you need, ultimately, this leads to resilience. The second observation on the data space is that many of our tools, people, and capabilities are specialized. So today, if I want to go build a data solution, I'm going to pick from a set of different capabilities in every part of this framework. And I'm going to try to stitch it together. I'm going to try to have folks spend a lot of time trying to make it work. And then the real question, and going back to that question of what does winning mean, what's the value that's actually being delivered from all of this when it comes together? And what's our agility and what's our speed? The third, I think, observation, and this is now looking at, and I've now done this analysis on a handful of companies, and it's roughly 95 to 97% of companies that this holds true for, especially large enterprises, where a vast majority of people are not data people, right? This is looking at a large CPG company in the US. I think we'd all know the name if we heard it. And they have over 23,000 people on LinkedIn. In fact, they have more than 23,000 people because they have drivers and they have folks that work in their bottling centers and so on, right? But of the 23,000 people on LinkedIn, if you actually look at their profiles, what you observe is that less than 1% are data scientists, and they have their tools. And then you've got less than 2% that are data warehousing and BI folks. And they've got their tools. And organizations, many of us here, we're making tremendous investments in this group. The question is, what's happening to that 97% of the organization, the folks in the lines of business? How are they getting their problems solved? What tools do they have? Can they leverage the investments that are being made by these teams? In addition, who actually understands the business problems more? Do the folks on these data teams actually know the business problems, or do the folks on the lines of business know the actual problems that are happening? And so what you find is that 97% is hugely challenged. And my hypothesis, and I think I've started to see this in many organizations, is how do you actually empower that 97%? Now, not all of them will become data athletes, but surely many of them are capable of doing it because they can be that multidisciplinary problem solver. So in that same respect, one of the ideas that I want to present is how do we actually create a profile with the rest of our organization that's multidisciplinary, that's agile, that can solve these problems. And I call that the data athlete profile. That data athlete profile is modeled around the world's greatest. And what does that mean? They have a mindset to perform and win. They can actually define what success looks like. They know what impact it's going to have on the customer because they know they want to perform like those athletes performed. And they know what impact it's going to have on the bottom line of the company. The other piece is they have obsessive practice. And what do I mean by obsessive practice? They understand the different pieces enough that they can integrate it together. And they know it deep enough that they've gotten training on that. But interestingly enough, I talked to a CDO yesterday. It was really amazing. he mentioned to me that one of the key capabilities for those data athlete-like profiles in his organization was the ability to do consultative selling. What does that mean? That they actually understand the problems, they know how to influence people. The third area is curiosity. Curiosity leading to new ways to play. What does that mean? Asking a lot of questions, having many hypotheses, testing and learning rapidly. And then also thinking differently. Let's focus on the 97%. Let's focus on how we empower that 97%. They understand the industry landscape, the competitive landscape. They know what are the things they can do differently to outcompete, and they even know how to differentiate their solutions beyond just the data analytics, how this actually goes into the workflows or the experiences that are being deployed to customers, suppliers, and so on. And finally, they raise the bar for everyone around them. And they bring together different profiles to solve problems. And I've seen a number of organizations do this effectively, and so there are 5 types of capabilities that I've seen, and I want to walk through each one of those. The first one being leadership, sponsorship, and role modeling. Often we know that if we want to drive change, we need a real desire to change, and we need our leaders to paint a picture for us. In many cases, that means in our respective line of business teams, whether it's marketing, sales, it could be if we have also BUs, commercial BUs, having a leader that's championing. And if it's not necessarily that specific leader, there's another senior leader in that organization that's championing these efforts. That part of the organization has also identified what are the top 5 or 10 opportunities. What's winning actually look like for that group? And the leaders within the organization, to a certain extent, are role modeling that behavior in different conversations in the organization. They're asking questions, they're asking what if, they're demonstrating that agile, flexible, problem-solving capability. The second is launching these data athlete boot camps, and I've seen many flavors of this, but the focus of these boot camps is actually integrative. It's not just on one thing, it's around how all this comes together. So imagine you take someone from a line of business who has that desire to want to improve the organization. You teach them about analytical problem solving, and we know about the descriptive, prescriptive, predictive, and prescriptive, and so on. And so you teach them enough so they know what are the capabilities out there. They don't need to be a data scientist. They need to know about the data in the organization. What are the 20 or 30 different types of data that they might use, and who to reach out to get the data when they need it. They need to know the tech capabilities so that if you need to build solutions together, how do you do it and who to talk to? And then finally, that transformation capability. What does it actually mean to run a data and analytics project? How do we keep track of different milestones? How do we do influencing and consultative selling? That's a tall task to ask one person to do. And that's why I think organizations don't need to have everybody who's capable, but organizations should be investing in creating these types of profiles. And I have seen organizations, for example, when I was at McKinsey, we launched a big program. We called it the Analytics Translator Program. That was roughly 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more than 6 years ago now. We trained up 3,000 of our managers. Many of those managers have now become partners, or they've gone out to industry. Some of them are chief data officers who are part of this conference, and so on. But it had a tremendous impact on changing the fabric of our organization. Now, these boot camps also teach these data athletes where they engage, and also where they engage with other profiles like engineers. And the data athletes need to be able to walk out and be able to feel comfortable doing that problem identification, hypothesis generation. They need to be able to do some self-service capabilities themselves, right? They need to have some of those skills. And they need to be able to create insights and know how they would change the organization. In some cases, these data athletes, however, will need more support than what they are capable of for themselves. And they'll need engineering support to create custom experiences, or deploying it into different tools, or creating APIs and custom actions and so on, right? Capabilities beyond, but there needs to be, data athletes need to be able to walk out with some hard skills to be able to deliver value. The third area is around building community around data, and I've seen many organizations do it. It's not necessarily a costly thing to do. In my experience, this became like one of the most popular communities, in my prior life, and we just created these analytics. Where is the data community? And I know another big retailer who's done the same thing, and we had hundreds of data experts, and we had thousands of interested, basically consultants or business users who had questions. And they would come, and every day there would be always these questions, and these different experts would start reaching out to each other, answering questions. We then started to codify that knowledge. We put it on a data catalog, and we integrated that data catalog with our enterprise search. What happened? We had 2/3 of the organization being able to use our data catalog, and find data and find experts. And now we empowered all of our different business users to go find stuff. And in addition to that, this helped spawn a community where we had, monthly, first quarterly sessions, then to monthly, and then newsletters and so on. Right? And I know we all have different flavors, but sometimes even something as simple as just setting up an interest group in a Slack community and getting everybody on board and having people ask questions is a way to get started and to build the energy and momentum for those data athletes, for those folks in the line of business who want to go solve problems. I think it's really important. I shared the slide earlier before about when you try to build a solution out today, you've got all of these different tools and capabilities, and it takes a lot of time. Well, it turns out a data athlete, you can't expect them to know that. It's just too hard. How do you give them the tooling to be able to do this in a self-service way? That's one of the areas that I focus on at Domo, and that's one of the areas that we focus on. And ultimately, the value here is how do you get them from getting data, integrating it, analyzing it, deploying it, and getting value from it. And I think this is a critical part is you can't deliver value if you don't measure it. You got to know how you're doing. And so I always think about it in 2 dimensions. The one is the activity metrics and the outcome metrics, right? And I think it's relatively simple on the activity metrics. How many folks have gone through these boot camps? How many folks are using your data catalog? How many people are on the community? What questions are being asked? How do you catalog those questions? How many users do you have using your self-service tools, and so on? The outcome metrics could be how many solutions have you actually developed? And then for those solutions, what's the impact of those solutions? What are the stories? What's either the dollar impact or the customer impact that's measured and just tracked? Because that ultimately builds the fuel and momentum to keep funding these efforts. And then finally, I found this to be really interesting. We've had some customers do this where they have different lines of business teams, and you've got an executive in the organization, sometimes it's the CEO, who's saying, hey, we want to really transform all of our different lines of business. They've actually created reports that show how many people in marketing are using the self-service analytics tools, the catalogs, and so on. How many folks in operations are? And it's really interesting when you get into those meetings and you can actually see by the different BUs and commercial groups who's actually doing what, and you show that as a comparison. Social comparison just motivates us to do stuff. I mean, that's the reason why people go on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook. Well, it works too when you show them these metrics and you can show that comparison. So with that, I'm really excited to invite Rob McKinney, who's the Director of Product Management at Harvard Business Publishing, to join me and to discuss how he's started to transform his organization in developing these data athletes. Thanks. Rob, thank you for joining.
Thanks for inviting me.
So I want to first start out, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit more about Harvard Business Publishing.
Sure. Harvard Business Publishing is a wholly owned subsidiary, a nonprofit subsidiary of Harvard Business School. And we're mission driven. So we're in the business of improving the practice of management in an ever-changing world. And as you pointed out, the world is changing pretty rapidly. And we do that in a couple of different ways. We have 3 different business units that really bring ideas and thought leadership from around the world, regardless of affiliation, doesn't have to be Harvard. And it comes into play around the Harvard Business Review Group, which publishes the magazine HBR. It's been around for 100 years this year, pretty amazing. And business books from the HBR Press. Higher Ed Group that publishes content and experiences for the business school community as well as undergraduate business programs. And then I'm in the Corporate Learning Group, which takes all of those learning experiences and content, and we develop leadership development for organizations that can spread it across their organizations. And we do that both in terms of kind of a digital self-directed learning, as well as programs that kind of prescriptive to fill strategic gaps within organizations. So my role within corporate learning, and I'm a director of product management responsible for cross portfolio initiatives. So things like reporting and integration and automation of our service organization. And so it's been really interesting to see, how we can bring data to life and solve new problems. So
Rob,
happy to be here.
Excited to have you here. And I guess one of the questions I'm thinking about is like, so what are some of the problems that you've been challenged with at Harvard Business Publishing?
Yeah, a lot of our offerings, our learning products within corporate learning are complex by nature in terms of the interactions with users or the types of assignments that we ask learners to do in a program. And so one of the first things that we were trying to tackle was we call them blended programs, but they're delivered in a cohort fashion over a period of time. And we have to gather a lot of information from a lot of different sources to be able to say, are people showing up? Are they doing the work that they need to do? Are they engaging in these programs and getting value? And that's really important to our clients. They really want to understand that. So the first problem we had was each of our project teams that are managing these clients were having to pull all this information together manually. So from all the different data sources. And they were creating this giant Excel spreadsheet, as you had on one of your slides. And it was hard for them to do, so it was burning them out because it was complex work, it was error prone. And our clients had to wait for the data. That happens all the time. You have to wait for the report to be generated. But even when they got the report, it was a giant Excel spreadsheet. It still didn't really give them actionable data to say, this is where you need to make an intervention. And so we knew we needed to have a better solution for it. And there's always costs associated with those things, and often you don't understand what those costs are until you actually dig in. And it was not just the people costs of the hours, but it was the taxing of them doing menial, tedious work. And there was also a cost in terms of our clients not having access to the data. So we used that as part of the business case to develop a self-service model based on Domo.
So let's dive deeper a bit on this one. What's the North Star for you? What's winning look like for you, given the challenge you just shared?
Well, the quick win, if I can say it that way, it took a while to get there, is to help our clients answer their own data questions. So let them understand who is performing well in their programs, who may be falling behind that they may need to outreach for. Make sure that they're getting the value from the investments that they're making in leadership development. Beyond that, it's answering the next level questions. How is this cohort of new leaders performing against the next cohort, and the next cohort after that? And so, again, every time you have data and you answer a question, it yields more questions, right? And so give them the tools so that they can do that data exploration on their own. It's also, the converse of that is our own internal teams are looking at the exact same data. And they're looking at how do we manage our offerings and how do we drive engagement? How do we make these programs more valuable to our clients and really move the needle against our mission, creating that next generation of leaders?
And can you give an idea of kind of the scale of the learning programs that you operate at the?
Yeah, so on an annual basis, it varies, but on the order of 25 to 30,000 learners per year in these blended programs. We reach a lot more of those learners in our digital offerings, which scales into the millions in terms of users. But these programs are a little unique from the standpoint of organizations are coming to us and saying, we have these gaps, and we develop a program specifically to drive development of those particular capabilities. And so it's really important it's strategically important to these organizations that they get it right and that they are moving the needle in those areas.
Okay, so what I'm taking away is, look, you have this massive customer base. They have these increased needs. Your vision is to provide a better experience for them because that's going to fulfill your mission. Mm-hmm. And data is a core part of providing that insight. I guess the question I have is, I touched on this concept of a data athlete. Can you talk about how your organization is solving this problem through like this type of profile and how you're going about it?
Yeah, I'll start a little ways back, right? If you look not even just a few years ago, in order to get a data question answered, you'd have to go to finance or go to engineering to even get the data, right? We built an analytics team, and we have these across our organization, but it's still the data people talking to data people, and so it's still in that 2-3% up at the top, right? And as we embarked on this journey for our programs, we started to see the ways that we could help the people delivering these programs do their job better, and started those types of conversations, understanding the questions that they're asking, and then again giving them tools to dive in deeper. And that's continued. So we've extended the reporting capabilities across some of our digital offerings as well, and now we're having those same types of conversations of, now that we have this data about what's going on in our digital products, we can go to our content team, for example, and help, what questions, how do you want to manage the content? What do you need to understand about content going forward, and help them do their job better so they can be more targeted and address the evolving needs of our clients.
So tell us more about those personas, right? Because you basically saying, hey, look, you had the 3%, they're kind of doing the data stuff, you're getting some insights, you shipped it out. Now you're like, hey, we want to empower all of these other folks within the. Who are those people? What do they do?
Yeah, so a lot of them are focused on, maybe it's rings of people, right? So the people that are working directly with our clients, they're in the daily interaction with our clients in terms of delivery of the program. So they need to understand what's right in front of them, what just happened, they had a live event, what happened, what's happening next, and kind of prepare for that. Then we have product folks that are looking at our various offerings, and they want to understand how they're performing, not just on a business front in terms of what kind of sales we have, but are they doing the job? Are they moving the needle? Are they getting the engagement that we're looking for? Are they getting the results that they're looking for? So now we're looking there. We have design teams that are designing learning experiences because we can kind of tailor our offerings, help them understand what's popular, what's resonating, what's not, so that they're not including those as part of our programs. And then our content teams that are kind of looking at the editorial calendar and looking at what we might want to publish on and what's of interest to clients, all those types of things, looking at some of the areas that maybe we don't address today, so some of those gaps.
And I'm interested, because we talk about the data athletes, and we talk about the boot camps and so on. So like, how do you get a profile like that to actually engage? What do you need to do to get them to start asking these questions? Or do they already have these questions? I'm just interested in how you engage that audience to use data that previously really didn't have much access to it.
Yeah, so a lot of it was just an outgrowth of seeing our own dashboards coming to life, and then going to some of these teams and saying, if what questions do you have? How are you managing it today? All those types of things. It's a lot of people don't have that mind space yet, or the mindset space to be able to say, oh, if I have a blank sheet of paper, what could I get? They're used to, this is what's available to me. And so it's a little eye-opening, but it takes somebody going and asking those questions, like what don't you have? What would be most helpful? All those things, and starting small. So on the content side, we started with those types of conversations, and then within a matter of a couple of weeks, had a prototype, and we just gave it to them and said, play with this, give us feedback. And it's interesting the questions that they come back with. They're like, could we just add this other data source? Could we, to contextualize a little bit more and so on. So you can see the thought process already starting.
And how much of this is like, you're talking to these folks who are, they're like the learning specialists, right? Like how much of this are they actually doing on their own versus they're just saying, hey, team, go create this report for me, or create this, like how much are they actually self-serving and asking new questions and kind of building on the fly and kind of building up some of these more data athlete, kind of multi-dimensional data athlete capabilities?
Yeah, I think it's probably more standard at the project teams, the people that are delivering on a daily basis, and it's enabling those folks to the next rung out or the next ring out to think more freely, right, and to ask that next level of question that gets you to the next level of question and so on.
So tell us about the impact. What impact has this had so far?
Yeah, so we've been developing and deploying the dashboards for our blended solutions for about 10 months now. And so we've got about 80 clients that are up and running, and we add new clients as their programs begin. So it's our new mode of operating. And we've got about 100 people within the delivery organization that are using these dashboards on a day-to-day basis. But the other thing that we've been able to do is also make that same data available to our sales team and our solution teams so that they can kind of see the programs that they've sold, the programs that they've designed, how are they performing. And that helps with the client relationship on an ongoing basis. On the digital side, we're just in the process of finishing those up, and that, again, will scale at an even higher level. So.
Any guidance for those who are embarking on this journey, kind of who want to engage like the 97%, they want to create sort of these new profiles?
Get started. Just, you know, you may start with a couple of data sources, you may start with one particular group, and from there, it really does become viral. Success begets success. So the more you get a quick win, then you can take it to the next team and say, what could you do with this? And you'll find that people take the reins and they'll run with it. They'll start asking more questions, and the more you can provide the self-service tools, the better they're equipped to answer that next level and the next level underneath that.
Excellent. Well, Rob, I know we've got about a little bit more than 15 minutes left. I did want to make sure that we had enough time for questions, especially from those who are joining us virtually and those here in the audience.
Let's start with the audience. Are there any questions from the audience? Couple of questions from the virtual audience. So the first question, it's got 5 votes. You argue that the current tool landscape is too complicated for data athletes. What is the minimal stack that an organization should have? What was the stack at McKinsey?
Excellent. So I would argue that I'll answer the question slightly differently in the sense that I've seen 2 types of solutions being rolled out. One type of solution is, hey, we're going to have like full native accessibility to Azure, AWS, go use Glue, go use Redshift, go use QuickSight, and maybe throw on Tableau, whatever, and then build your solution. Go build your solution, right? I've seen that flavor, right? And you can do the similar, Azure has its capabilities with Azure Data Factory and so on, right? Synapse and whatnot. The other flavor that I've seen has been more hey, like we want to empower, and by the way, that type of tool set doesn't really work for the data athletes. Like they have no clue, they don't even know how to use an AWS console, it just doesn't work, right? Then you got this other audience, which is basically like, look, we'll use some set of desktop tools, Alteryx plus Tableau or Excel. And what you typically end up finding is that really great to get to insights quickly, really, really good to get to insights quickly, but they get stuck, you can't scale it, there's no governance. And it's really hard to actually drive operational improvements beyond that. And so what ends up happening is then those prototypes that get done, and they can get done relatively quickly, you then need to bring in an engineering team to actually go figure out, like, how do we productionalize this? And then typically it can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months, even if you've got a great COE model where, I showed that 2x2, the known knowns, unknown unknowns, right? You're basically taking now that new problem and you're trying to productionalize it. Well, then you've got this whole process by which that happens. That team that's productionalizing it typically is backlogged because they have so many resources, and they're again tremendously valuable, but it's just backlogged. So it doesn't actually get delivered in 6 to 12 months. Well, that data athlete actually wants to show value. And so that's where, quite frankly, there aren't that many tools out there that actually go end to end that solve that problem. That's where my experience, my own personal experience with Domo was so valuable, is that I was able to actually build those data apps those data solutions with these different types of profiles. And I think many of our, and obviously I want this session to be informational, and this is more of a thought leadership piece, but that's my lived experience.
We have another question.
I'm also interested, that's my point of view. Rob, I'm interested in your point of view if that's consistent.
Yeah, so we use other tools, certainly within our analytics community, and we found for our particular purposes, they didn't serve the purposes we were trying to do, including making self-service, a reality, both for our internal teams and for our clients. So I think you have to look at, each use case independently, but it made it really easy for us once we had kind of everything lined up, and not the disparate tools, everything kind of working together makes it easier for us to move a lot faster. So.
Okay, anybody in the audience with a question? I will, okay, step to the microphone.
Hi, I just want to say I love the analogy with data athletes. I think it's amazing. And just like athletes on a team sport, there's different positions that people are really good at and requires different skills. When I think about measurement, and we hear a lot about this in the conference so far, and outcomes and activities, I'm kind of curious about your experience, whether or not that's a different type of athlete, data athlete, that's really skilled at measurement and attribution, or are we expecting the analysts that actually create the assets to do the full measurement and attribution cycle so that those outcome activities, those outcome are really well known?
A great question, and maybe I have just one maybe slight nuance to that question, which is, I think it also depends on exactly the type of outcome that you want the data athlete to have. For example, a digital product team and product owners may have a different level of rigor on the metrics that they need to provide and manage versus, let's say, someone who's running a customer experience initiative and just needs to know like how many customers registered for something, right? And so my experience kind of at the macro level has been, wow, for any single solution that wants to be created, what I call data app, let's actually talk about first, what's the business impact of that? And there's different ways to measure it. One way to measure it is what's going to be the top line impact, revenue impact, what's going to be the profit impact, right? There's also the piece of the customer experience or risk mitigation. Let's actually have a business case and let's have those metrics and let's put together, what's the cost to deliver this, what are the profiles we need, and then let's actually measure against that to see what happens. That's at the macro level. At the micro level, there may be certain measurements, as you've mentioned, that you may also be referring to, which are specifically to like campaigns that are happening, or they could be to certain marketing initiatives that are happening. And in that case, maybe you do have the data athlete, in my opinion, should still know those. Are they actually doing that analysis themselves? They may not necessarily need to, but when they're running a specific product, in my mind, I think they should have a clear understanding of those metrics, how they impact it. Someone else could be doing the analysis for them, but they shouldn't be shy to actually be able to do it themselves if they need to, right? Mm-hmm. Rob, I mean, I'm sure you see this probably a lot more on the product side than I do. I'm interested in your view.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The experience that we've had with, say, our analytics team, they are the ones pulling together, some of the dashboards, and they're responding to one set of questions. But when you're trying to get into the insights and really get to the outcomes, it's somebody that has that business context, right, in terms of where it's coming from and what you're trying to solve for. So I think the more you can enable that person to ask their own questions and answer it, I think that's ultimately where you want to get to. Yeah.
We have another question from the audience online. I think this is a great question. Building a high-performance team is great, but how do you manage retention of data athletes, which is increasingly becoming a challenge?
Do you want to take that one? Or?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a point of view on this one. So first and foremost, I expect all of my great, talented people to at some point either grow into another role that isn't on my team or leave my organization. And especially my most talented folks, I want to keep them, but I recognize that that's not always going to be the case. And so for most of the folks that I've worked with in my different experiences, a big part of my role has actually been around how I can be a coach, how I can actually craft out where do they want to be in 5 years, how do we get the right initiatives internally that can help focus on those skills, and then how do we actually start thinking about, in some cases, those roles may be in my organization, in some cases they may be outside the organization. How do we set you up for success? Because I'm invested in people. And so that's one avenue. I'm expecting them to leave, but I want to be a coach in the journey. The second thing is, I really, really think, and I see this at Domo, I saw this at McKinsey too, like, these folks are so curious. They're so curious. They want to see challenging problems, and they want to keep learning and developing. And the more that is part of what they're doing, it's great. Like, I have a very good friend of mine who now runs, a very large data team at, great organization. And he basically, what he says is, like, he misses being around people who ask all these great questions and who are interested in solving and so on. So it's a combination of these two things. Like, how can you just expect the fact that they're going to leave? And that's okay. You're part of their development journey. How do you help them in that development journey and be part of creating opportunities for them? And the second, and I know that sounds so weird to say, right? It could be also my background from McKinsey because so many people left, right? That's just part of the model, but that's how I grew up. The second is the fact that it's really, really important to ensure that you're providing the constant learning and developing and the challenging. And I think people often stay for that. And then finally, just being around other great people that they like, right? And so it's a combination of those three things that I think keep talent with your team.
Yeah, so the only thing I'd add to that is leaving doesn't mean leaving the organization necessarily, right? It could be leaving for another role and a bigger role, right?
Yes.
And so, I think that's incumbent on a lot of organizations too, is let them solve bigger and bigger problems, so.
Great. I'm the track producer, but I have an answer to add to that if you guys don't mind.
Sure, please.
Because I've been at this for a bunch of years, and I think you made a really good point about understanding where that person wants to go in their career, and thinking about how you can help navigate them, both within the organization, but being open to helping them. If that journey takes them outside of the organization, because then you create a fabric of interest. The other thing I think you also said is building compelling experiences for your team, creating compelling experiences to keep their interest. I would just add a little bit of a wrapper to that and say that everyone wants to be a part of a high-performance team. Like, if you create a family fabric and a team that's really solving interesting business problems, and they love working together and they love hanging together, they're going to hang together. And they'll be less inclined to listen to those pulls that would take them away from the organization, and more inclined to figure out how to become greater within what they're contributing as a group together. So just having a real focus on building a high-performance team with challenging problems to solve is one of the greatest retention strategies that I've found for the teams that I've managed in my career. So I just wanted to add that if I could.
I absolutely agree.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Back to the audience. Any other questions in the audience? We have a couple more online. Okay, I'll pivot back over here. Well, this one is pretty simple. How do we access or review the trainings you offer online? And I think this is to the Harvard Business Review. How do we access or review the trainings you offer online?
Yeah, so I mentioned we've got 3 different business units, and I'm happy to provide, maybe as an answer in the app, direct access to the, depending on what group you're in, if you're in higher ed or corporate learning or an individual, but we sell our learning experiences or make our learning experiences available through all 3 of our business units. So if you go to hbr.org, for example, you can see content from the magazine and from our online properties, as well as a number of those learning experiences. That may be the fastest way of getting at it, so hbr.org.
Great. Question here. There's a microphone.
So one thing we've talked about on my team, I've seen articles about this too, but even like, who's a data scientist, right? So is it a statistician? Is it a programmer? A skilled storyteller? or a combination, right? And I was just wondering how you translate that back to the concept of a data athlete, because I think having those technical barriers can be daunting for people. And when you think about that in this context, what's the background someone needs to be just more comfortable with data?
I think the data scientist term has a lot to unpack, quite frankly, and I think I used to feel that there was an agreed upon definition, and now I believe that definition is evolving a lot, right? And I think in the past it used to be they're familiar with all these models and they can actually create those models, and maybe they do some data prep, but now a data engineer can do the prep. But there was something around the fact that they knew the models and they knew the analytic methods and they knew how to apply them. And to a certain extent, to make a great model, you need to have good hypotheses, you need to have good questions, and so you need to be able to understand a bit of the business context, right? I've seen an evolution now where, like, for example, at Meta and other organizations, like the folks who run the data science teams, they're not actually doing any modeling. Like, they're just asking questions and they're saying, these are my hypotheses, and they're aligning themselves very closely with the different business teams. And some of the folks that I had on my team, when I used to ask them later, I said, are you data science? I said, yeah, what I do is I actually scope problems and I have the hypotheses. I actually don't do any of the coding. I don't do any of the data prep. I just oversee a team that does that, right? And so I think there's various definitions. I don't want to go as far as to try to define it because I know there's many different ones, but I do think that there are folks who are building models and so on. You need people who are performing in it. I think the thrust of the data athlete is really to move towards more problem-centric solving and really understanding the business context, knowing what winning is, being able to lead teams of folks who are different backgrounds, and in some cases be able to solve on your own as well, but not necessarily having to be able to code per se. And I think about the data athletes not in that 3% of the organization which are on those common data teams. I think about it as in the 97% of the organizations who are driving the transformation closest to the problem. And so hopefully that gives a little bit better definition as to how the data athlete is different from what we would maybe traditionally consider a data scientist.
Great. We have one more question from the audience online. So I'll throw that out. We have a few minutes here. What are the roles/titles within an organization that should be data athletes? Data analysts, data scientists, data engineers, data stewards, etc.
I would say that those roles can, for example, and this is a conceptual piece, right? There's no hard and fast rule that says it has to be this. What I'm trying to say is, how do we create these multidimensional profiles? And when I say that, I also mean that, yes, a data analyst could become a data athlete, but again, a data athlete at their core, let's talk about the characteristics that person has. Let's not talk about where they sit or necessarily do they need to be a data analyst. The characteristic of a data athlete is that they actually know the business problems. They know what winning is. They know how to be integrative in bringing things together. They know the industry. So they know how there's and I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with folks who are data analysts or data scientists, and they will create an insight or an analysis, but not really understand the business problem. And because they don't understand the business problem, they don't think 3 steps ahead, and they're not curious enough to ask those questions. And now you're creating a lot of inefficiency in the process. And I've talked with data scientists who are working on churn problems who actually don't know what the competitors are doing in terms of what are the offers that the competitors are offering. Why are people actually leaving? To know why people are leaving, you actually need to go interview customers. You actually need to interview folks who've left. You need to see what's happening. You need to be, not just thinking of your job as a data analyst. So what's the conclusion? Let's talk about the characteristics. Let's align on what those are. It does not preclude a data analyst from being a data athlete. But what I'm saying is that we need to create these more multidimensional profiles to be able to solve these problems. Than most organizations have, unfortunately. I think most organizations just haven't done enough on that side yet.
Well, great. Looks like we're out of time. It's 4 o'clock right straight up. So can we have a great round of applause for this great presentation today? And how about a round of applause for yourselves as a great audience for this presentation? You guys deserve it. Round of applause for yourselves. Thank you. Our presenters will be here for any questions for a bit.